All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Solar Surge weekly live training. Hey, guys, we are here every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. We stream out to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And by the way, about YouTube, we have actually moved Solar Surge University to its own Solar Surge University YouTube channel. So the link that you got in this week's email invitation should have taken you to the new channel. And that's where we're going to have all of our content for solar professionals. A lot of what we do on the main YouTube channel is really geared for consumers, people that want to own these products for their homes. And so we wanted to have a separate place where we can just dedicate for those solar professionals that are interested in learning about the industry and maybe potentially interested in working with Solar Surge in the future. Now, in today's training, we're going to be talking about the economics of solar. In other words, how to make the financial justification and how to compare solar to other investments that homeowners might be considering. Now, at this point, I'd like to bring in my co-instructor. Dan Freshley, as you know, is the CEO at Radiant Solar and also my partner and co-instructor here at Solar Surge University. And Dan really does great at this particular part of the solar sales process, which is really analyzing the numbers, understanding the numbers, and how solar makes sense as a good investment, as well as just a great technology. I think that can really help people to become more energy independent. So Dan, it's good seeing you again. I know we've had a busy week, but welcome back to the broadcast. Really looking forward to do this one with you.
Yeah, as am I, Joe. This is a fun topic, as you just kind of alluded to and mentioned. I sometimes kind of nerd out on numbers and finances, which is funny because if you were to ask the younger me, I wasn't a big numbers person. I don't know, maybe I had a couple teachers that I just didn't get along with too well or something. But as I've gotten older and become a business owner, I've realized the importance of understanding my numbers, of accounting, of amortization tables, of just kind of weird, nerdy number things. But it makes a difference. And I've kind of oftentimes said a lot of solar is an economic sale. I mean, whether, we coach that or not, the reality of it is most people are looking into solar because they want to save money. And if you can do that, combining it with other objectives and motives, it can really help you, your family, and sort of a legacy sort of impact in that regard too. So looking forward to kind of getting into this topic.
Absolutely. By the way, folks, one of the reasons why we do these on the live stream is so that you can ask your questions and have your questions answered in real time. So again, if you're somebody who's interested in joining the solar industry, or maybe you're already in the solar industry, if you have any questions about solar technology or solar sales, go ahead and just put it in the chat feed if you're on YouTube, or you can post a comment if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, and it'll come up on our screen here. We can actually put the question up on the screen, and we'll do our best to get an answer for you here in real time.
Joe, speaking of which, I think we actually already had a comment in here a little bit before we started from Paul Sutton. So Paul was asking, please discuss the new 10% federal ITC under the IRA. Are any projects going to qualify for it this year, or will PV manufacturing have to happen in the U.S., including making these solar cells? Paul, I don't know if I know exactly what 10% you're referring to, other than there was a provision that talked about an eligible additional 10% for solar systems that were installed in lower income designation, zones and such, or projects that were developed as part of federally subsidized housing and things of that sort. If there's an additional 10% that you're referencing, that's not that. If you want to, comment back, or even maybe drop a link in the chat here pertaining to what you're referring to, we can certainly unpack that a little bit more. But that's my understanding of the 10% that you might be referring to there, unless, Joe, you know of something else.
I think Paul may have been referring to a tax incentive for manufacturers, an incentive for them to bring their manufacturing back onshore. I mean, Dan, as you know, a number of the top brands that we've been working with, whether it be, Enphase, Q-Cells, I think Home Grid Battery to some extent, a lot of them are bringing their product manufacturing back onshore to the U.S. And I think that has to do with a certain incentive as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. But I'll tell you though, Paul, that's not an incentive that I really work with a whole lot directly. I mean, most of our clients here at Solar Surge are individual homeowners, and so they're claiming that 30% federal tax credit where they can. And of course, that is a big part of the economics of solar. So Dan, as I know, as we get more into the training today, when we talk about how we present the numbers on a solar deal, that's typically one of the things that we're going to present is not just the total cost of the project, but what percentage of that is potentially coming back to you in the form of a tax credit, and then could that tax credit be leveraged to help reduce the cost of financing?
Yep,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, and I think for what it's worth too, just to elaborate there, Paul, if that 10% that Joe's referring to, certainly the manufacturers would have incentive in that, right, for their own tax liabilities. But um, to Joe's point, I don't know if any of that would necessarily pass through to the end homeowner, unless maybe what Paul's insinuating, and I'm not familiar with, is that if you choose a particular product, you get an additional incentive by having that particular product that's on like this IRS, approved list or something. To my knowledge, I wasn't aware of something of that sort. There could be obviously an advantage there for sure. And I can understand the economic power of that, but I'm not aware of that. So if anyone has any other information, drop it in the chat and continue to comment in as we discuss today.
Yeah, Paul, and thank you for the engagement, guys. We really do appreciate it. Keep this conversation, bi-directional to the extent possible. But Dan, let's go ahead and start out with the basic structure of a solar deal or of a solar offer. So let's say when you're presenting to a homeowner, how do you first sort of contextualize the solar cost, and how do you present it on your end?
Yeah, great question. That really is going to be kind of the first pain point or the first area that we want to get into, right? We call this internally, and if you were a Solar Surge University, member, if you've invested in the course, you'll hear us talk about this concept of kill the bill, right? But that really is the first part. Is we need to understand what is your current state of economic situation, right? How much money are you currently spending, whether it be per month, per year, on the utility company, right? What is your average cost per kilowatt hour? What are your taxes and your fees and things of that sort? As we kind of unpack this, since we're going to get a little bit more into numbers today, I would make sure as well that everyone is aware, just because a utility company publishes a cost per kilowatt hour doesn't mean that that's truly what the end homeowner is seeing. I've seen this a lot of times from a lot of utilities where, they'll have a headline or a tagline on their website that says, haven't increased rates in 5 years, 10 years, or our cost per kilowatt hour is, 0.07 cents per kilowatt hour or something just really, really low. But the reality of it is that that's not truly what the cost to the homeowner is, because the cost to the homeowner is typically comprised of both the generation costs. So utility costs are oftentimes broken up into generation, distribution, transmission. There could be other taxes, fees, utility riders, things like that are all added in. So when we're doing the economic calculation and we're getting the baseline of, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, this is where your utility bill is today, we really need to look at, here's what your actual bill is. Here's what the utility company is expecting to either debit your account or for you to send them a check, divided by how much kilowatt hour consumption you're actually using, right? When we do that math, that will be the true cost per kilowatt hour. So that's kind of the first thing that I'm really looking at, is what is the cost per kilowatt hour, right? Short term, what is that penciling out to in terms of your average monthly bill? And that's why it's important, to the greatest extent possible, get an actual bill from the homeowner. Most utility companies, not all, but most utility companies will show like a 12 or 13 month, at least, bar graph of energy usage, and you can get your best, estimates. Some utility companies, like here in Virginia with Dominion Energy, I think in Florida, FPL and a couple others, Duke Energy, provide specific numbers, right down to the exact, hey, this is exactly how many kilowatt hours you used on a month by month basis, which means you can just add that up and get a 12-month total. Here's your total annual usage. Here's your cost per kilowatt hour. The math is simple, right? Total usage times cost per kilowatt hour equals total annual expense. So that's the first part, is get the baseline of where they are right now today.
Right. And then of course, typically what we'll show during a sales presentation is, what's the cost of this today, but then based on the historic rate of inflation. I mean, right now we're in a very high inflation. For the last year or two, we're seeing numbers in some states 10%, 20% year over year increases. But typically what we'll do is we'll show an extrapolation of, hey, if we just have average inflation going into the future, say 3 to 4% per year, what does today's electric cost actually look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now? and more importantly, what's that total cost over the entire next 25 years? Because
Exactly.
that's essentially the cost of doing nothing, right? The cost of just sticking with the power company. And I know that's something that I include in almost all of my sales presentations is today's monthly cost, what the monthly cost will be in 10 years, what the monthly cost will be in 20 years, and then what's the cumulative total cost that you would have spent over that 25 years. And typically that number is 3 to 5 times or more of what the cost of the solar system would be.
Exactly. So that's kind of bolstering that whole kill the bill. So I'll actually share my screen here with us, Joe, so we can take a look at a little bit of this because I think this is helpful. This is straight out of the Aurora, solar design software. It's part of their proposal tool that we use here. So for anybody that is looking for tools and systems like this, we're looking for installers. Right, you've heard us talk about it before, but if you want to be a dealer partner of ours here, we provide access to this exact tool as a dealer partner. So what I'm actually going to go through here, I'll jump over to the actual screen. This is a deal that I was working on in Virginia, just as an example. And in the earlier stages, I went in and I queued in the exact usage information for this household, right? So I was able to go through on a month by month basis, fill out how much they used January through December to come up with a cumulative total. Now, once I got that cumulative total, I know, okay, their average bill is $175. Again, just doing the math that I explained earlier. Their average rate here, I guess, quick little tidbit of information. Aurora pulls in rate schedules from all the utilities across the country. It's probably not 100% of them, but a very, very high percentage of them. Now, I do find that sometimes when I do the mathematical manual calculation, that the average cost per kilowatt hour isn't exactly the same as what my calculation is. So there are means of overriding this rate on the back end of the software. But for the sake of the conversation, it's 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Now they have fixed costs of $30 per month. So regardless of whether I cover 100% of their energy or not, this particular homeowner is still going to have a $30 fixed cost bill, even if they're at 100% coverage, which you can see up here that are 104% coverage. So they're still going to have a $30 bill. Now, the forecast that we show, Joe, is a 4% annual escalation or inflation rate to the energy costs. And that's simply just based on historical data. So sometimes we'll get a little pushback on that. What's the 4% based on? I'll say that actually, let me rephrase. I used to get pushback on 4% prior to 2020 and kind of the COVID and beyond era. Now people are like, oh man, that's low, right? Because it's a relevant conversation today. But again, that is the point of an average, right? An average is over a course of time what is happening. And so historically, I think since the 1980s to about 2020, it was an average of 4% per year nationally. And so that's what we show from a simulation perspective. So again, this is all kill the bill. We're starting with, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, you're at $175 today, but at just 4%, 5 years from now, you're up to about 200. 10 years from now, you're up to 236. Obviously, I can show them 15, 20, but I generally will show now 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years, right? Because they get what I'm explaining here. Hey, 25 years from now, you're up to $400 per month, right? But more importantly than that, I'll pivot over to the 25-year total and say, this is your true cost of doing nothing. This is your true monopolization with the utility company. You're going to spend at least $81,000 over the next 25 years just by simply paying the power bill every single month, right? Writing that check and dropping it in the mail. This is what that's going to cumulatively add up to. And here's the worst part too, Mr. Homeowner. We can agree this is based on a 4% escalation. We've seen rate increases of X, right? Pull recent data, right? In certain states, we've seen rates go up by 30%, 50% just in the past 2 years. So you explain some of that this is a very modest, very conservative outlook. They're going to spend $81,000, regardless of whether they want to or not. Another thing I like to do here, and hopefully this will show up. Let's see if it does as we're talking here. Are you seeing my little spotlight search show up here, Joe? I don't think so. Here, let's do this.
I don't. I can see
sorry.
your mouse cursor.
Okay, I'll open to a new browser here. So one of the things I like to do, just to do a calculation, I'll take this 81,000, right? 81,141, and divide that out over 300 months and tell them, hey, your average bill over a 25-year period based on these numbers is going to be $270 per month over this 25-year period, right? So even though we know today that the average bill is 175 and in 25 years from now, it's going to go up to 400, your average over this 25-year period is about $270 per month, right? Because ultimately, assuming that I'm going to kind of use the stop sharing for a moment, but assuming I'm going to kind of use the comparison of here's your monthly payment for solar versus here's your utility bill to help kind of bolster the sale. I want them to know where they're at today, what their high will be over 25 years, what their average will be over 25 years. And that kind of leads me then into building the value proposition from an economic perspective. So that's what I like to do. That's again what we really call the kill the bill, right? And as much a lot of times I like to pull up other things too. I like to pull up news articles that says, hey, this is what's happening with the utility company. Here's a rate increase. Here's a headline, right? Here's what's happening. Because again, like it's not just you explaining this, but it's use other resources to say, look, I'm not just falsely claiming this. Like this is what this is actually based on. One of the ones I actually should have showed here, and just let me go back and share this one more time with us, because this is a pretty helpful tool to have. Here we go. So this is the U.S. U.S. Energy Information Administration, and I just pulled this up for Florida, but I'll reference this a lot of times. If you go in here and I scroll down, I can look at the prices section. It would normally be collapsed. I can open up prices, and I can see for electricity in Florida, the residential cost right now is 15.36 cents. The U.S. average is 16.11, so a little bit below the U.S. average. But let me do the state of Florida as an example. The state of Virginia, since I was just using that as a comparison. Open Virginia, go to prices. I can look and see, okay, the average residential is actually 15 cents, right? And so the numbers I was showing back on this proposal here earlier, if we just go back to month one, has us at quite a bit lower than what the true average across the state is right now. So I'll reference that and I'll explain like, hey, look, this is where the average cost was a couple of years ago. This is where things are today. Again, this is very conservative at 11 cents. I'm 4 cents below the state average in the numbers I'm showing you. So it's possible, Mr. Homeowner, that your power bill is actually higher than 175 today. I'm giving you very, very conservative numbers. It's a pretty conservative outlook. So that's a lot of what I like to do there in that kind of early stage of the kill the bill process, is really kind of create a pain point, right? Or like make sure it's a reminder of, look, you, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, you haven't known any different up to this point, because all you've ever known is a bill comes in the mail, you have to pay it. What are you going to do? Right? I'll use analogies of like, you can't shop this, you can't negotiate it, right? If you don't like your mortgage rate, you can go refinance it, try to get a better deal. If you don't like your cell phone bill, go to a new provider, right? You don't like your car payment, negotiate it, right? Go get a new car. But what are you going to do with your utility bill? In most states, with the exception to a couple places that have the ability to choose utilities, you don't have another option. It's incredibly monopolized. And so regardless of whether you like it or not, you're going to have to spend the money every single month for the rest of your life. And your kids were doing it, your grandparents, I mean, it's going to happen, right? So I'm really trying to emotionally kind of get a stir going there. Don't oversell that part, obviously, guys, but if they sales 101, right? Like that is the need, that is the pain point, and we're going to try to come in now and provide value as to how your option and your alternative is better.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So you're showing them the numbers behind it, and the numbers themselves are terrible, right? I mean, literally, it's usually 3 to 5 times the cost over 25 years to just stick with the power company versus buying solar. But you're also building that emotional pain, and so there is a little bit of salesmanship that happens here, maybe a little bit of performance. I know I practice my delivery on this part of the presentation a few times so that I can deliver it smooth. I'm not trying to like remember lines on a script. And then I'll say, look, Mr. Homeowner, like my goal is to get you out of this. My goal is to get you out of this situation where you just have to keep paying a higher and higher rate and you never pay it off. Because it's not like in year 25, you pay it off. At year 26, more bills are coming at a higher rate. And it's just that type of situation where you keep paying or we shut the lights off. And that's the deal that the power company gives you. You have no control. And so the goal is to get them out of that, to put them in a position where they are in control of their energy situation. Right. You now own the means of producing your own electricity. So it is an important part of the process. And by the way, folks, if you're learning how to sell solar, or if you're interested in learning how to sell solar virtually, grab the free download. There should be a link in the description below. This is the 3-step virtual sales process that we use here at Solar Surge. Same process that I use personally. And of course, for those of you who are in Solar Surge University, you can actually see recordings of a handful of my live calls with real clients that have purchased solar through Solar Surge. So you can see exactly what that back and forth looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing, Joe, too, just at that same point, right? We've talked about before, and we've taught the process of you're trying to create similarities, right? You're trying to speak in the language that the homeowner recognizes, right? A lot of homeowners might not be super familiar, like a lot of the Solar Surge audience is, with the ins and outs of solar. So for a homeowner that's never looked into this before, you got to talk in the language that they understand. So I'll a lot of times use the analogy right here at this stage where I'm in the kill the bill is, hey, this is no different than the idea of renting versus owning your home, right? It's generally understood by a vast majority of people that long-term owning your home is a much better economic situation than renting a home, right? And kind of wasting money on rent for your entire life, right? And it's the same idea here. Right now, the only problem is, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, you've been renting electricity, and the landlord keeps increasing the rate and keeps increasing the rent every single year, and you've gotten no say in the matter. But as soon as you own the system, right, you own your home, now at least the money that you're paying is going into a nest egg. It's going into an investment. It's a CD in the bank, right? It's money that you've got equity value in. And the same thing here goes for your solar system, right? If you're going to be having to sell, if you're making a payment every month, I'd rather my payment go towards the solar panels that I'm paying off to own, where I can increase the value of my home, eventually, sell my home for an increased value, ride appreciation in the real estate market as well. Those are other conversations we can kind of unpack here too, because that plays into the solar economics of all of this. But that's a big part of it too, is just making that analogy and saying, hey, what I'm proposing is you no longer being a renter, but being an owner. Let me help you do that.
Yeah. And the phrase comes to mind, Dan. I know we've mentioned this on a number of trainings, is whatever we present them is going to be better than sticking with the power company.
Yep.
Whether it's purchase, whether it's financing, leasing, but pretty much any deal that we put together for them is going to be better than just sticking with the power company. Right. And so that's the cost of doing nothing. Now,
Exactly.
I did see we had another comment that came in here from Solar Guy. I'm just going to put it up on the screen. And he's asking, how do we create urgency with the states that have one-for-one net metering left, besides describing central distribution and the monopoly money hungry? So I think this is a great question, Solar Guy. And I think the answer is actually in the question, which is that right now the trend nationally is a move away from one-for-one net metering. All right, we've already seen it in California, and California is the trendsetter when it comes to solar policy. So just like they let us into net metering, California first, and then other states adopting it, they are now leading us out of net metering, meaning that, and just to take a step back for those that aren't familiar with exactly what net metering means, net metering is essentially means that your relationship with the power company is a two-way relationship. So during daylight hours, you have abundant solar power coming in. You can power your house on solar. You can sell all the excess solar during the daytime back to the power company, and they give you a credit on your account. And then during the evening hours, you use those credits you've accrued to pull power back in, or to pay for the power that you're going to have to pull back in during evening hours when the solar is not producing anything. Now, a true one-for-one net metering means it's equal value, right? Whatever kilowatt hours you send to them during the daytime, you can use that to pull just as many back in during the evening hours. So you're getting full price credit. You're getting a full one-for-one value. Well, the trend that's happening now, again, led by California, is that the power companies don't want to give you full credit for the electricity that they have to take for you during the daytime, even though they're going to charge you full retail price for whatever they sell to you at nighttime. So right now in California, it went from a 1-to-1. It used to be back in the day a true 1-to-1, debit credit balance. Now it's a 4-to-1. In other words, you have to send the power company 4 kilowatt hours of excess credit or excess solar electricity during daylight just to be able to pull one back during the evening. And so that really eats into the return on investment from the homeowner, right? The homeowner wants to get full credit if they can. Now, I understand the justification. The justification is, look, the power companies invested in all this infrastructure. They've got all these lines, all these vehicles, all these employees that have to keep the grid healthy. They've invested in the cost of all that. They want to be able to sell electricity at the full retail price, not be forced to buy it back from consumers at the full retail price. And so what we're seeing now is more of an avoided cost type of scheme, or at least that's the language that we use here on the East Coast, avoided cost, where it's when you have excess solar to sell to the power company, they'll give you the wholesale rate, which is like the cheaper rate that the power company is buying it from the power plants. But then when they sell it back to you, they sell it back at the retail price. So it eats into the ROI. Excuse me. But I think where the urgency comes in, Solar Guy, is the fact that since we know that the trend is away from true one-for-one net metering policies, now's the time to lock it in while you can still get it. Because typically once you get approved for a net metering agreement, that agreement is good for 10, 15, or 20 years. So I think that's the urgency right there.
Yeah, I think the big part of that too, just to kind of elaborate there a little more, is that, again, inevitably net metering is not going to become more prevalent. It's going to reduce. It's going to pull away. More utility companies are going to take that away ultimately, because it's in their best interest to no longer have net metering in a 1-to-1 ratio if they can prevent it. So the first part of that is, like Joe said, the answer is sort of in the question, right? Take advantage of net metering while you still can. Grandfather yourself into net metering. A lot of utility companies, like for example, in California, if you were on NEM1 years ago, you still have NEM1. NEM1 didn't go away. You still have one-for-one net metering. Even when it went to NEM2 and things changed slightly, you're still grandfathered into NEM2. Now that we're into NEM3, it's a different process. But the point of it is that these people were grandfathered in when they made their original investment. So that's kind of the first thing. I would create a little urgency around that. The second part of it too is I tell people from often, hey, look, the people that have benefited the most from having solar are the ones that went solar a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so on, right? Like it's not going to become more economically beneficial 5 years from now than it was 5 years ago, right? Because if you kind of cover that 10-year delta, during that 10-year delta time, do the math on how much money you would have spent on electricity, right? We can go back in here. Let's do this real quick. This is a good exercise to do, because this is literally what I would do in real time with the homeowner. We can go back here and we can say, hey, let's look at the comparisons over a 10-year period, right? As we were waiting for things to get better, there was $24,000 that was spent on electricity. Even if the cost of solar comes down, even if equipment gets better, panels perform better, inverters improve, batteries drop, the question becomes, can the homeowner get a $24,000 better deal in that 10-year delta? Probably not. I don't foresee cost of solar equipment dropping to that extent where that actually would make sense. So I'll then kind of further elaborate and just explain, look, like even if we do the conversation about 5 years, right? Hey, they're looking into solar right now. They really want to do it, but I've heard new technologies are coming out, and in 5 years I can get a better deal and this and that. Okay, possibly, but you can run the numbers and you can look at an illustration and say, look, even at 4%, you're going to spend over $11,000 on electricity over the next 5 years as you sit and wait. So then the question just becomes, you need to have decreased your cost of the solar system, and what your investment will be 5 years from now. It needs to be $11,000 or less for you to have any real benefit. And that, we look at kind of the numbers and the trajectories. That's not what I'm seeing. So again, the urgency is always now net metering. There's a variety of other things that are happening, but that's not just some sales gimmick, right? Like I'm not on a call right now trying to sell a homeowner this. I'm talking to other solar professionals, other people that are aspiring to be in the industry. That is just the true reality of the numbers and of the details here, is that the best time to go solar is, well, yesterday. But really, if you can change it from yesterday, right now, today, right? The sooner you do this, the sooner you have an advantage, the sooner you'll win, the sooner you'll benefit. And this is a big part of this conversation about the kill the bill, and kind of have some sort of tool that allows you to do this. I had a Google sheet that I used to use back in the day. It was essentially an Excel file that showed this exact same sort of illustration. And I just called it my energy spend forecast. I can actually pull this up as like a really quick reference point, because this was something that I used for a really long time. And I had one up. Oops, here we go. I had one up here earlier, right? Just as an example, I'll go in here, I'll fill in, and this is a pretty simple sheet that can be created. I'll go in and I'll fill in, okay, how many kilowatt hours is someone using? Let's say it's 17,896. What's your current cost per electricity? Let's say it's 13.5 cents, or let's say it's 14 cents, right? I'll pull this number a lot of times from the energy data here, right? I'm relying on a .gov website. So I'm pulling the data here. I'll, 0.1521. So come over here and go 0.1521. Here's what's going on right now today. This is what your average bill is today. This is how much you're spending annually. Here's how much you'd spend over 25 years. And this is assuming a 4% increase, as you can see here. And I have these highlighted fields of year 5, year 10, year 20. So even if you're not using a more sophisticated software like Aurora, there's the means of building something like this pretty simply, and just having a 4% add-on to the average monthly bill year after year after year.
Great. And by the way, folks, if any of you are watching this from California, or maybe you're used to selling in California and you're kind of bummed out about the fact that you're not able to sell on this massive monthly payment savings, Dan and I have been selling on the East Coast really ever since we got started. And it was always pretty much a 1-for-1 bill swap scenario that we were selling. In other words, if you take what you're spending now for regular electricity with the power company and you compare that to what your monthly payment would be, even if you did 100% financing for the solar purchase, no cash down, you basically are ending up with what ends up being a pretty close 1-for-1 bill swap in year 1. Of course, the longer that you have the system, right, everybody else's electric bills are going up with inflation, but you've frozen your monthly cost with a fixed interest financing. Again, very similar to buying a house with a mortgage versus renting. You might not save a whole lot switching from a rent payment to a mortgage payment in year 1, but the mortgage payment, if you've structured it on a fixed term, fixed rate, fixed term, that payment's not going to change. And so there are plenty of people out there that want to buy solar, even if it's cash flow neutral or cost neutral in the first couple of years, just because this is a technology that they want. This is a position that they want to be in, the ability to create their own electricity. So, again, for you folks that came from California where, the rates are much higher, and the interest rates when they were low, in some cases you could cut somebody's electric cost in half because there was such a delta between the solar payment, the electric bill payment and the solar payment. But even if it's an even bill swap, it's still a compelling offer for somebody who believes in the technology. And that's another thing is people buy what they want, right? At the end of the day, people buy what they want. There's other investments they could buy instead of solar, but the fact that they're talking to you about solar means that they're interested, right? They somewhat like the idea of this being green or being energy independent. And so if you can help get them there the best way, even if it's cost neutral, don't let that be a reason for the deal not to make sense. At the end of the day, it might just be something that they want to have. They have that confidence level in you. They have that confidence level in the equipment that you're offering, the installer that you're representing. Your chances are they'll do business with you.
Exactly. And again, Joe, I remember, going back 7-8 years now, right, where interest rates were, when we were first, for a long time, we didn't have any financing options, right? When we first kind of got started, like it was all cash deals. And then financing came along. We're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, cool. But our rates weren't great. They were 4.99, 5.99, maybe some 3.99s, right? Like they weren't what the industry had become accustomed to in the past handful of years, where you had these 0.49, 0.99, 1.99, like these really low interest rates. And a lot of times too, I know particularly, right, we were in Virginia, there wasn't any other incentives. There was the federal tax incentive. That was it. There wasn't SRECs. There wasn't localized incentives, and utility costs at that time were 10 cents, 11 cents, 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So like there was this tough economic position where cost of electricity was so low, interest rates were a little bit higher, right? But a lot of these loans also too back then were kind of variable rate, that after a period of time they would switch and the rate would increase and increase. So there was arguably more objection to making the transition. Again, this is before COVID, right? So like the relevance of inflation and all these other things was one of those like, oh, I don't believe you type of conversation. So we had to overcome that objection versus the state right now where everyone knows. You could live under a rock and that rock's getting more expensive, right? Like it's just what's happening. And so I do remember that it was oftentimes like if you were a perfectly south facing home, it was a bill swap. Oh, my power bill's $150, your solar payment would be $150. So then we were building value, and hey, the reason why you're doing this is about energy independence and owning this. And, again, it's the ownership versus rent analogy. But there was a lot of times where if the house wasn't ideal, it was a $10 monthly increase, $20 monthly increase. And we really, and maybe that was just something I had to get good at early on, was like selling about the value of owning this long term in the empowerment mindset of like, I have control of this versus the utility company where someone else tells me every month what I got to send them. So I think that's a really important thing. And frankly, if anything, it's even a reminder to myself, right? Like, don't get discouraged with what's happening with rates and fees and this and that, because that, the solar industry that I got started in, frankly, probably wasn't near as attractive as the solar industry today. Even right now today. So, there are some things that, there's some good reminders in those things that, like, keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is, how much can we help you save long term, right? And that segues into some other value selling too. What company are you representing? What's their track record? That's a lot of what we do here at Solar Surge, because we've got such great partners nationally that we can really build on that value sell as well. But
Yep.
talking a little more about economics, right? The next step of the conversation ultimately then becomes the price of the system, right? Like, okay, what is the total cost? And I got some scenarios that we can kind of look at here as well, Joe. I pulled a project. Let me share my screen again. Again, this is just using our Aurora system here. So I pulled this exact same project. Now, for context here, what I was proposing for this project, I'll back this up for those that are watching just to kind of show. So part of our process, right, we go through this energy usage step. We then move forward and we'll actually show them their design in Aurora. This is one of the great things about Aurora, is this 3D representation of a home. I can come down here and I can turn on things like LiDAR. So this home doesn't have an accurate LiDAR reporting. But for example, you can see over there in the distance, what you're seeing here, these are trees that were reported on LiDAR. So it allows us to build out your design or the homeowner's design exactly to, proper scale. But then the most important one that I like highlighting is this irradiance mapping. So the irradiance mapping here showing roof surfaces and their overall efficiencies. Now, this is a really great south-facing home, about a 35 or 33 degree pitch. So it's got a really great overall irradiance. You can see that the south is really good. The rear here, and these darker colors on the front, not as good. Orange would be kind of the middle ground for this home. So we've done some other videos in the past about Aurora too. So check that out if you really want to kind of see the whole software itself. This is about if we're using battery. There are some cool ways of adding in batteries here, and then seeing, how that would back up loads. Am I using it for backup purposes? Am I using it for self-consumption? This can be particularly beneficial for people in California or under time of use policies, right? Kind of the NEM3 policies, because you can use this to forecast, hey, how does having one battery, two batteries, three batteries, how does that help me economically? And that's another thing I'd say too for Californians that are selling solar. There's still a strong economic value, right? It maybe is not the cut the bill in half scenario, but now it's, hey, add battery backup, reduce your cost, and have emergency backup power for rolling blackouts or disasters or wildfires or whatever could happen, right? Again, it goes back to that energy independence type of thing. But moving on here, now when we get into the numbers, right? For this particular deal, I can show a couple different scenarios, but let's just quote it out as a cash option first. So what we're showing on this one here is the total overall system price, $36,400. The available incentives that are for this deal, right? We've got a 30% federal tax credit because we're proposing a ownership option. Even though it's financing, it is an ownership option for the homeowner. So it's a $10,920 federal tax incentive. And then in Virginia, there are SRECs, which are solar renewable energy certificates or credits. And what we're showing here is the current 2023 values. And we're showing this over a 5-year period. The reason why I do this, and this is what I explain to a homeowner too, is that SRECs inevitably can go on for as long or as little as they continue to exist in the marketplace. We don't have that crystal ball to know exactly what it is. So for the sake of giving an honest evaluation of the numbers, I'm cutting it off after a 5-year period and just saying, hey, look, if we get SRECs at year 6, year 7, year 8, awesome. That's going to only help this be even better. But at 5 years, this is what your cumulative value of SRECs would be worth. For those that don't know, and just real quick, as we're talking about the economics, SRECs are paid based on every 1 megawatt hour or 1,000 kilowatt hours of energy that you produce. So every time a solar system produces 1,000 kilowatt hours, in this case, solar system production was 16,203 annually. So they would be earning 16 SRECs per year at whatever that current market value for the SRECs are. So we're showing this 5 years. We can kind of do the math backwards to figure out the value, but this is 5 years of SREX kind of bundled up here. And then ultimately, these incentives is what's factoring into this net cost. Now, one of the things I like to show is the conversation of payback period, right? If we're talking about cash, sometimes cash buyers, if they've got $36,000 to invest right now, are probably in a little bit more of a financial aware, financial savvy position. And so sometimes there'll be questions about, okay, well, what's my payback period or what's my break even period? It's the same question asked in two different ways. So payback period on this deal is showing 10.47 years. Now, what is the basis for that? If I actually expand this down and we look at the cash flow here, we can see that from the month, year one when they made their investment, then after their incentives, and then each year as they're saving money from the utility company, right, they're paying themselves back. And right here at about year 10 is when they hit that break even. Now, things to explain in this particular scenario. Number one, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, this is a 10.47 payback period based on a 4% per year assumption of rate escalations, right? If rates go up higher, which, hey, can we agree that in the past 2 years, they certainly have, get an agreement with them, right? They're saying yes. Then your payback period will actually consolidate, right? Because the comparison to the alternative of sticking with the utility company means costs would have gone up higher. So your payback consolidates. If it's a 7%, if it's a 10%, this is going to drop half a year, year and a half, 2 years. The other part of this as well is, again, going back to SREX in this particular example, we're only showing 5 years of SREX. If you get SREX in year 6 and in year 7, that also is going to help consolidate this payback period. So a lot of times I'll explain that as saying, hey, the adjusted payback factoring for assumptions of higher rate increases, a continued SREX or continued other incentives, right? Whatever those may be, you're probably looking at an 8-year payback period in this case. Over the years, I'll tell you that anytime I'm showing right at about a 10-year, that seems to be like the sweet spot where people really want to see their payback period. I don't know about you, Joe, but that's a lot of times what I've heard from homeowners I've worked with of, yeah, if I can get to 10 years, that's where I want to be, a 10-year payback period or less. So a lot of times this is that simulation that I'll walk through if we're talking about a cash option. Any thoughts on that side?
Yeah, I used to get this question a lot more than I have recently, and I wonder if it's because I'm working with a lot of folks who are already actively searching for solar, and that's how they find me. They're searching for specific solar equipment so they can choose the right equipment. But yeah, I remember back when we were selling together in Virginia, it was about that 8 to 10 year payback period. If we could keep it within that range, that was acceptable for most people.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the first part.
Yeah.
Now, the other part too, because I will say that, at least for a lot of the clients that I work with personally, or my company, Radiant Solar, works with, we're not working as much with cash buyers, right? We have a door-to-door team that maybe knocked on a door, and certainly the person that was cooking dinner when someone knocked on the door probably wasn't expecting like, oh yeah, I'm going to spend $50,000 tomorrow on a solar system, right? So having financing becomes a pretty significant value proposition for that as well. So if I can split back over to this. So a lot of times I might go ahead and do a comparison and put these side by side, or just for the sake of highlighting this a little differently, I'll load up here just a particular option. Let's just say I was using this one and let it load up. So what I've queued up here is a low interest rate scenario, right? This is a 25-year term at a 3.99% option. 3.99% interest rate. This would be for the person that oftentimes is saying, yeah, I want to do the bill swap, right? I want to trade my bill from this to go to that. Now, here's what I do think is important if we look at this. Remember earlier on here, I'll back it up real quick. We figured out that the average bill was $175 per month for this homeowner. We also figured out that over 25 years, based on $81,000 of cost, that their average over 25 years was going to be $270. So I'm keeping those numbers in my mind as I pivot to my financing cell, right? Give me 1 second here. And so right away, we can clearly see monthly payment, $200 a month. We can see what the total cost of the system is, what the net costs are, what the tax incentives are. Obviously, if you've been in the industry for any length of time, or you're just kind of learning more about it, there are financing fees that get added into the projects, right? Sometimes referred to as dealer fees. But what I am typically explaining, like I said a little earlier, use terms that homeowners are understanding. This is a rate buy down, right? If you want today's no fee option, I can provide that to you. for this particular example, that'd be an 8.99% interest rate. But you had told me earlier, as I was going through the discovery process, that your number one goal was about a low monthly payment. So that I'm trying to give you the lowest monthly payment scenario. And I can show, and hopefully we'll have enough time, but I can show why even with the higher dealer fees, it can still economically, holistically be better for a homeowner to accept the higher dealer fee, lowest interest rate, monthly payment swap scenario. And that gets into the conversation of opportunity costs and other investments and things of that sort, right? You've got to just, as you kind of learn your customer, you learn what makes sense for them and what their motives would be. In this particular example, we're looking at a $200 payment. I can come down here and I can look at things as well. And here's the simple reality. Even at a $200 payment, I can still show this homeowner that they're going to save $12,000 minimum over the next 25 years by swapping from the utility company to solar instead. Now, of course, that $12,000 is not as significant as the cash option was, but this is where that other side of the coin comes in. This is where the other kind of like economic strategy comes in. I think actually would be helpful here. Let me just load up both of these side by side. Let's show financing and cash side by side. Now you can clearly see total system cost here, cash, $36,400, financing, $52,753. So pretty stark difference between those two. We've got about a $16,000 difference, right, in the rate buy down to get to that point. If we expand this down a little bit, we can see over 25 years, $12,000 saved by financing. We can see $46,000 saved by paying cash. And this is an illustration that I would do here. But here's the thing. In order for this homeowner to get to the this cash scenario, right, they've had to part ways with $36,000 up front. Assuming they qualify for the tax incentives, they receive that money back, the other incentives, the very least, they're parting ways with $20,619. And then there's that 10-year kind of waiting period, 8-year waiting period for them to have that break even. What I like to do a lot of times, depending on how sophisticated the conversation, I'll take this number and say, well, hey, let's look at an alternative. What if you decided to finance this, right? And yes, it's a higher amount. Yes, you pay interest. Yes, your payment's $200, but let's go look at, and I'll pull up investor.gov and look at a compound interest calculator. What's your opportunity cost on that money instead? In other words, if you took that money and put it into an investment account, what would that yield you? So it wouldn't let me copy paste, but let's just go ahead and plug this in, 2619, right? Let's assume you contribute nothing to this, right? And then let's look at this because we're comparing this over a 25-year period. Let's look at 25 years at an average return of 8% per year, which is pretty conservative for an S&P 500 index fund, right? I pulled up something here earlier just about average returns. What we've seen historically from investments in this kind of category, where's the number? Since 1957 through 2021, it averaged a little shy of 12%. You can also go in here and you can look at historical years, what's happened, right? The last year we had was 2022. Yeah, of course, it was a very down market. But 2021 was a very up market. 2019, very up. 2020, very up, right? And there was a lot of other years prior. I mean, we go back here to 2013, 32% returns in 2013. So I'm taking these numbers and being very conservative, putting in 8 years, and let's compound this annually, and let's calculate. $141,000. And so this helps illustrate that point. Hey, look, again, even if you have the cash to invest in a solar system, sometimes your money is better spent in the market with long-term exposure and growth, right? Because that $20,000, your net cost on this solar system put into an investment account over 25 years, which is the comparison to the solar investment, yields you $141,000 of tangible liquid, asset at that point, right? Liquidity in an investment account. Whereas and then not to mention too, you still saved yourself $12,000 over here on the financing option. So this is kind of like the have your cake and eat it too conversation that I like to get into sometimes. But again, I'm only going to get into this if a homeowner has alluded that they're really considering this option or that option. I had a meeting with a gentleman last week where he was really weighing these out on both sides. And the conclusion he came to is that he'd rather finance it because any extra money that he was originally thinking he might put into the solar system, he could use to pay off a higher interest loan on a mortgage or a car payment or something else. Or even if you're a more cash flow focused, cash flow minded person, he could just pay the monthly minimum payments here and take all this other money that he was considering investing into the solar system. And really, quite frankly, what we should be looking at is we should be looking at this number being invested, because that's the amount of money that the homeowner was willing to write the check for, right, for the solar system. Which means if you take that money and instead of sending it to the solar contractor, you go ahead and you park it in an investment account instead. I mean, the growth on that is going to be very substantial.
So Dan, when you're doing this, do you always present both options side by side, or do you tailor your pitch here based on what you uncover during the discovery process as far as their financial intentions?
Good question. Yeah, I do not always show that. I just wanted to recalculate this here. It's running slow, but no, I do not always show these side by side. Again, it's tailored based upon the discovery. Discovery is absolutely crucial from the sales process. We need to understand like what makes them tick, what are they interested in, and what is their goal, right? And I'm going to tailor my sale to what their goal is. If their goal is about, I want the greatest economic impact. And I've talked about this before, but a couple of the questions I'll generally ask in discovery. I'll ask, hey, when you buy a car, are you more focused on the overall total price, or are you monthly payment shopping, right? Do you have a budget in mind for monthly payments as to what you can afford, and that's your main goal? Or is your main goal like what is the total price, right? Just because the number showed up, that $36,000 that they could have wrote the check for solar is $250,000 over 25 years, right? So this is just a good comparison side by side. Here's the other part for those that are probably wondering, well, yeah, but I'm going to have spent $52,000 on the solar system, or let's even go one step further. Let's just do the whole calculation. $200 a month. This is probably not showing up on the screen. Over 300 months, right? Let's assume, because I can hear somebody saying right now, oh yeah, but the interest, right? The 3.99% interest. You're absolutely right. This $200 a month has that 3.99% factored into it. Let's assume you never pay it off fast. You only pay it off super, super slow, and you take all 300 months. That's $60,000. But again, $60,000, take that out of the 249,000 here. You still put yourself in $180,000, $190,000 better situation for your household and your family over a 25-year period. All the while, remember, all you did was just change where your monthly payment was going. Your average monthly payment over the next 25 years was going to be $270 a month for electricity. Now you're averaging $200 flat for 25 years, and gave yourself and your family an additional $190,000 of net worth, because you parked your money somewhere else and just waited and played the long compounding interest game. So, but sorry, Joe, to go back to the main question, I discovered this earlier on, right? I want to figure out what is your goal, what is the incentive. Now, if someone's kind of on the fence, right? If you're one of those maybe higher net worth people, or you have the income and you have the assets, just go ahead and invest in solar right away. But you're like, yeah, if I can get a better deal, if I can sense that they're a little bit of a savvy financial person, then I might have this. I might literally go through this exact exercise with somebody. And that's why I say a lot of times we as solar professionals, we're not just solar salespeople, right? Like we really play the role sometimes of financial advisor, or just a sounding board, or some sort of person that can lend some insight. Now, I would always caution, of course, like you don't have a fiduciary responsibility to them. You're not actually a financial advisor, so don't claim that you are, but you can give some perspective. You can just say, hey, this is what I've helped other clients with before. This is what I've done personally. And that's my personal strategy. So for anybody that's watching, on my own home that I own a solar system for, I financed it. Even though I knew the different scenarios that were available, but I chose to finance it because I'd rather have my cash that I can go put in an investment account and grow for me over time, right? Because the growth over time was going to be a lot more impactful than paying off the solar system and the solar loan in the short term. So that's what I chose.
That was really powerful, comparing even with the higher dealer fees, because you've got such a low interest rate, even with your total monthly payments on financing, you're still saving a considerable amount, keeping your cash and having that cash working for you, as opposed to buying the solar system outright.
Yep. Now I will tell people too, just for that point, if the homeowner indicates that they're the type of person, go back to the analogy, hey, how do you like to buy a car? Are you more about the payment or more about the price? if they're the kind of person who's like, oh yeah, I typically take a loan, but I like to pay it off early. I would say that if you're going to if you're going to accept the higher dealer fees and the higher financing charges and the lower interest rate, you've got to be committed to that strategy long term. Because otherwise, if you knew you were going to pay this off sooner, you're better off to go with a lower or a higher interest rate that reduces dealer fee a little bit more. I know we're kind of, starting to wind down on time here, but just to highlight an example of that, if I were to go in and I were to switch this to, let's say, let's go to the 599 option. What we'll notice here is that the overall financed amount is going to decrease, right? It went down from 52,000 down to 43,000. Again, that's the difference of the bank essentially saying, hey, if you don't want this lowest interest rate, your price will drop. So this is good. And you can run these schedules and kind of these calculations to figure out, hey, you really need to pay this system off at X period of time. I think actually what's a pretty cool exercise here to look at, notice how the monthly payment only changed by $5 though, right? So this could be worth doing, especially for somebody that is like, hey, I don't think I'm going to take 25 years to pay this off. I'm probably going to pay this off in 15, 20 years, maybe less. Well, they save themselves, about $9,000 on their total payoff balance. What's going to have to come out of their account to pay this system off. So this could be a better option for them to take a little bit higher interest rate. It only changed their payment by $5, but it dropped their payoff balance by $9,000. And then the last scenario would be the option where, maybe somebody just wants the same as cash deal. Let's see if it'll calculate for me there. Here, let's try this again. As it's loading though, the key thing here with the same as cash deal is going to be the same thing, right? They're going to get that same payment as what the cash was, right? 36,000 over here, 36,000 over here. Their monthly payment did increase. It went up by about $24 per month. But again, at 8.99%, if they pay this over 25 years, you're going to notice, right? Their savings is the worst here. So like if you're going to commit to this option, the homeowners, for them to really win, need to pay this off in a handful of years. I typically would see about 5 years at max for a loan like this. Now, I always sometimes there's a stumbling block. People are like, oh, 25 years. I don't want a loan for 25 years. This is just the way the banks structure them. There's no prepayment penalties. Obviously, always check with your particular lender or company that you're working with. If there's a homeowner watching this, just to be crystal clear that there's no prepayment, but most of these loans is kind of industry standard that there will be no prepayment penalties. But this solution here would be a good option if you're the kind of person who likes to pay things off fast. But again, I would argue, if it was just me running the numbers and looking at this holistically, the best option is still the lowest monthly payment. Use your money and put it to work, right? Like I think Grant Cardone talks about it, and some other people that are savvy, investors talk about how every dollar is like an employee. You send them out and ask you to go make you money, right? Go do more for you. And that's kind of the philosophy that I largely do subscribe to, is I want my dollars working for me versus, like, again, what was my alternative? My alternative is I pay the power bill every month, right? It's like, it doesn't matter. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Donald Trump, you name the billionaire, right? They all have power bills. Right now, they might own power companies too, but they all have power bills, right? And so the reality of it is it doesn't matter. It's like your power bill doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter how wealthy or poor you are. You're going to have a bill every month. So realize that's the case. If you can substitute that with a solar payment that you own, you're adding equity value to your home. We haven't even talked about that angle, right? If national real estate data and Zillow data shows about a 4.1% value increase. So sometimes I'll show a calculation. Hey, by installing solar, here's what your current value is. Here's the 4.1% bump. Hey, you're thinking you might move in 10 years. Okay, well, real estate typically goes up by about 3% per year historically, right? We've seen some down markets and some really high markets since COVID, but just run 3% per year plus the 4.1%. Here's what solar actually did for you, right? And so, like, even for people that want to move short term, there's a calculation to be had there where you can show, hey, this is what you can expect to see in equity value. Sorry, I off on a tangent there, but because I enjoy these conversations, like I really like numbers.
This is good stuff. But I think if I can just summarize for the audience what I've heard you say is when you're considering cash purchase versus financing, and maybe which type of financing to use. If the person already has the cash set aside and they already have made up in their mind that they want to just buy it, I'm generally not going to want to get in the way of them buying it, right?
Correct.
Unless they raise objections about the cash payment schedule, because sometimes a homeowner is sensitive about making a down payment to a contractor before they actually have any work done. So if the payment schedule becomes the issue, I might suggest take the high interest financing, the same as cash financing, just use it as a bridge to finance the construction phase of the project. Then once the system is fully up and running, you can write a check, pay off the entire balance, but you're paying the bank once you have a finished project. You're not paying the contractor up front, hoping that they're going to finish on time.
That's that's a really big strategy there too, right? If you're concerned about payment schedule and this and that, or you want to keep your money at work for as long as possible, take the high interest 0% loan, right? Or the zero dealer fee or zero financing cost loan. And then when the project's completed, you typically have a grace period of about 30 to 60 days before your first payment and interest would go into effect. Pay it off in that 30 to 60 day window, no prepayment penalty. It's essentially the bank lent money temporarily for you to pay cash, and you win, your money's protected, contractor got paid. That really can be sometimes the smoothest process. The only downside would be a credit inquiry, right? Like once it moves to a hard credit check, that's the only downside. But if you're in a good position, financially, it's probably a safer play to do that.
Right. Well, folks, I know we're out of time here now. Unfortunately, we didn't get to dig into too much of the new leasing option, but I think that's the other option that we would put out there. In addition to the high dealer fee, low interest loan, in the past that would have given you your lowest monthly payment option. Now taking the lease, especially if you do lease with a yearly escalation, generally that's going to give you the lowest monthly payment option. So if absolute lowest monthly payment and monthly cash flow is the financial strategy, and like Daniel said, you really have to be committed to that strategy long term if you're going to make that commitment, because once you commit to the lease, you're committing to the entirety of the lease payments. Just like once you accept the higher dealer fees to buy down your interest rate, you're not getting that back, right? You're going to have to pay off that higher balance when it comes time to pay off. But if that's the strategy is long-term cash flow, then there's still some great low interest rate options or lease options that are out there, guys.
Yeah,
well,
I think
sorry,
for what it's worth, and I know we're over, but I typically have seen on some of the lease deals that I've been proposing about on average, maybe $30 to $50 decrease versus the lowest interest rate option. So again, if you're really all about how much can I save per month, then we can have a conversation of, hey, your power bill was here, your savings is here, take that money, invest it into an account. I mean, like you can really get into these now and look at where you'll be at 25 years from now by doing that. But I would wrap it up to say, hey, if this is of interest to you, book a strategy call with us, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that we really want to do here at Solar Surge to help other prospective, solar sales professionals, or if you're a homeowner tuning in, book a call with us about an actual consultation for your home, right? We're happy to help. We're happy to walk through the strategy, walk through what makes the most sense for you. Partner with us if you're interested in becoming a dealer partner. But these are some of the things that we have in our tool belt.
Yep. And of course, as always, folks, we have the Solar Surge 3-step virtual sales process. It shows you how to do an initial needs analysis, discovery, figure out what your homeowner is trying to accomplish, how to deliver a sales presentation, and then how to follow up to close the deal. So that free download should be on the link below. Frankly, should be on the link below on all of our sales training videos. So that's a great place to start if you're considering a career in solar sales or switching to virtual sales. Well, folks, that pretty much does it for today's live stream. I know we're a little bit over time on the hour here. Again, we are here every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We stream it out to the new YouTube, the Solar Surge University YouTube channel, as well as the LinkedIn and the Facebook group. And we look forward to see you again in a future training.